Bitter Creek, Arizona Territory, 1874. The sun rose like a wound across the mesa, a slow, bleeding light spilling down the ridges. Wind dragged dust through the cottonwoods, and from afar came the creak of a rope. Something hung there. Not a flag, not a man, not quite a ghost. Sawyer Halt pulled his horse to a stop. He had ridden before dawn to check the cattle fences along the lower draw, but the land had other plans. Down the slope in the red wash of morning he saw her, a woman, no, a girl, maybe mid-20s, hung upside down from a dead oak. Her ankles were bound, and two crude wings made of white-painted boards were strapped to her back. One wing had snapped, the splinters sticking up like ribs. Around the base of the tree lay a circle of empty bottles and boot tracks. Someone had called her an angel. Then someone had laughed. Sawyer dismounted without a word. The wind smelled of iron and sage. He drew his knife, cut the rope, and caught her before she hit the ground. The false wings fell beside them with a dull thud. Her skin was cold, her lips cracked, but her eyes, they opened hazel flecked with green. She didn't cry out. She stared at him like she was memorizing the shape of mercy. "Easy," he said quietly. The word barely reached his own ears. He carried her to a patch of shade. When her breath caught in gasps, he unbuckled his canteen, poured water against her lips. She drank without sound, dirt and paint streaking down her throat. When she could move, she turned her head away and pressed her palm flat to the ground. For a moment, she whispered something in her language, syllables low and rhythmic, a sound older than any prayer Sawyer had ever heard. The air seemed to still. Even the flies stopped moving. He looked down at the wing. The paint was cheap, the feathers cut from old flour sacks. He gathered them and buried them beneath a mound of earth. When he turned back, she was watching him. "Why?" she rasped. He didn't answer. He just lifted her, set her across his saddle, and started toward the cabin. The wind rose behind them, carrying away the echo of those who had mocked her. The ride back to his land took most of an hour. The sun climbed the desert, waking in slow colors, copper, rust, gold. Ayanna drifted in and out of consciousness, her head against his chest. Every so often she murmured words he couldn't catch. When they reached the small valley where his cabin stood, the light was turning harsh. He laid her on a bedroll near the fire pit outside. He didn't dare bring her in yet. She was Apache, and the town feared anything with that name. Even a rumor could burn a ranch to the ground. He wet a cloth and wiped the dust from her face. The marks from the rope stood out like bruised vines around her ankles and wrists. One shoulder was raw where the wooden wing had cut her skin. She stirred, eyes blinking open. "This your land?" she asked in broken English. "For now," he said. She studied him, then the horizon. "They leave me for crows." He nodded once. "Not today." Her gaze shifted to the fire. "You bury wings, I did. Good." She exhaled, not relief exactly, but release. He fixed a small fire and boiled coffee. The smell drifted between them, sharp and honest. When he handed her a tin cup, she didn't drink right away. She touched the rim, then set it near her lips as if measuring his intent. Finally she took a sip. "Name?" he asked. "Ayanna." He waited. She looked at him, chin lifted. "Means eternal blossom." He nodded slowly. "Sawyer Halt." Her eyes narrowed. "You kill men?" He hesitated. "Used to." She seemed to accept that. Then, no different. "We both hunted ghosts." The afternoon wind picked up, rattling the tin roof. She reached for the dirt, scooped a handful, and let it fall between her fingers. "This land remember," she said softly. He looked toward the horizon, the red ridges burning under the sun. "Then it remembers too much." When she tried to stand, her legs trembled. He caught her arm without thinking. She froze, then allowed it. "You stay until you can walk," he said. "You want trouble. Already got it." She watched him a long moment, then nodded once, a gesture neither surrender nor thank something in between. That night, the wind howled through Bitter Creek, dragging the ashes sideways from his fire. Inside the cabin, Ayanna slept near the hearth, wrapped in his coat. Sawyer sat by the door with his rifle across his knees, eyes open to the dark. Outside, coyotes cried to the hills. Inside, two strangers breathed in rhythm, the beginning of a silence that might one day turn into trust. By morning, the wind had lost its voice, leaving only silence and a thin veil of dust over the land. The light through the shutters turned the room gold and gray, soft as smoke. The cabin smelled of pine ash and iron, of someone having survived another night. Ayana slept long, deep, like a wounded animal that finally found shade. Her breath was slow. The bruises along her ribs had darkened to purple. The rope burns raw but clean. The broken wings, the ones those bastards had tied to her shoulders, lay buried now beneath the cottonwood roots behind the cabin. Sawyer had done that before dawn, wordless, as if laying something sacred to rest. When he came back, the sun was barely over the ridge. Steam rose from the tin kettle, curling like a ghost. He poured water into a basin and washed the dirt from his hands, his fingers rough from years of tools and regret. By the time he turned, she was awake, sitting by the hearth, wrapped in the wool blanket he'd left. The coat had slipped from her shoulders, showing the thin white line of a scar at her collarbone. She fed small twigs into the fire, careful, deliberate. "You shouldn't move yet," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "You bury the wings." He nodded. "Then we can talk." The words were steady, not as an order, not a plea, something between a ritual and a warning. He poured the last of the water into the kettle, set it on the iron plate, and waited for it to hiss. "What do you want to talk about? Why you help?" The question sat between them like a third presence. He stared into the coals. Didn't seem right, leaving anyone hanging that way. Her gaze lifted slowly. "Men who did it, white men, yes." She touched the edge of the blanket, thumb brushing the worn thread. "Then maybe you fix what your people break." That stung, but he didn't argue. The kettle began to boil loud in the hush. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed one to her. She took it, smelled it first, a hunter's habit. The steam rose curling around her face like a small ceremony. They drank without words. Outside, a hawk turned lazy circles over the ridge. The sound of wind returned, gentler, now brushing through the cottonwoods like an old prayer. When she finished her coffee, Sawyer stood and opened the door wide. The light spilled in harsh clean. "You can stay here until you're strong," he said. "Then go wherever you need." She looked past him to the open land, scrub sage, the long cut of Bitter Creek, shining like glass in the distance. Then her eyes came back to the cabin walls, bare, built for one man and his ghosts. "This place cold," she said, "not from wind, from memory." He gave a small laugh that wasn't laughter. "I built it that way. Keeps people out." "And at work," she said softly. Something in him cracked at that, a sound faint and human. For the first time he smiled, small, crooked, half forgotten. She turned back to the fire. "In my tongue," she said, after a pause, "we say, ashes are memory of kindness. You keep fire. Maybe you remember." He didn't know how to answer that, so he nodded. By noon, she tried to stand. Her body moved like something newly born, cautious, testing the ground's promise. He rose, but didn't reach to help. She crossed to the doorframe and leaned there, looking out over the valley. "You name this place Bitter Creek," she said. He followed her gaze. "The water's clean, but tastes wrong. Guess the land remembers too much blood." She smiled faintly. "Land never forget, but it forgive if we listen." He didn't understand half of it, but he liked the sound. As the day cooled, she went to her small pouch, drew out a handful of seeds, small, brown, weightless, and knelt beside the wall of the cabin. She pressed them into the dirt with her thumb, whispering under her breath. "What are those?" he asked. "Wild corn," she said. "It grow if earth still kind." He crouched beside her. "Not much grows here." She glanced up. "Then we see if mercy live in ground." He watched her hands move, scarred, elegant, stubborn. The earth took the seeds quietly, like it had been waiting. That evening, they ate together. Beans, a strip of dried venison, weak coffee. She ate, slow, eyes half closed, like the act of chewing was a prayer to stay alive. When darkness came, the fire and the hearth threw their shadows against the wall. She sat with her knees drawn up, her hair loosened from its braids. The air was warm, but held that uneasy stillness after a storm. She spoke first. "Tomorrow they come." He frowned. "Who?" The men from town. They want to make sure their angels stay dead. Sawyer's jaw tightened. He reached for the rifle near the door, but didn't lift it. They'll find nothing here. Ayanna nodded. We listen to Earth tonight. She tell us if danger come. He didn't understand, but something in her tone made him obey. Later, while she slept near the fire, he sat by the doorway, rifle across his knees, eyes on the horizon. Coyotes called from the hills, long, lonely notes that sounded like names. He thought of the wings buried in the dirt, and how even things meant to shame could become relics if buried deep enough. Sometime after midnight, he rose, took the spade again, and walked out into the cold. The wind had shifted north, carrying the scent of juniper and rain. He stood over the shallow grave where the broken wings lay and began covering it with stones. Not for protection, for weight to keep the past from rising. When he came back and the fire had dimmed, Ayanna stirred. You do ceremony. Something like that. She watched him through half-lidded eyes. Good. Spirit no follow when stone close over shame. He sat beside the fire. That what you were doing this morning, planting against shame? She smiled faintly. Planting against forgetting. They didn't speak after that. The silence was full, not empty. By dawn, the color of the world changed. Dust, gold sky, washed clean. Ayanna was already outside barefoot, standing by the patch of turned soil. Her breath made small clouds in the morning air. Sawyer stepped out, blanket still around his shoulders. You sleep at all, sleep when land sleeps, she said. Now she waking. He followed her eyes to the faint green of the creek, below the shimmer of early light on water. For a moment it felt like peace had found its way back to this broken stretch of earth. Then a hawk cried from above, sharp, cutting the quiet in two. She looked up. Messenger. Bad news, he asked. She shook her head. Reminder. He didn't ask of what. Inside he poured 2 cups of coffee. When he handed her one, her fingers brushed his light, almost accidental. But it lingered just enough for both to feel the warmth that wasn't from the fire. They stood there in silence, steam rising between them, the air carrying the faint scent of cedar smoke, and something else, hope maybe, or the ghost of it. That day passed without threat. The men from town never came, though both kept listening for horses. They worked in near silence, mending a fence, fetching water, tending the little patch where her seeds lay sleeping. As the sun set, Sawyer found himself watching her more than the horizon. The way she moved through the land like she belonged to it, and it to her. He had not believed in forgiveness before, but when the wind shifted through the cottonwoods and caught in her hair, he wondered if the earth had already begun forgiving them both. That night before sleep, Ayanna spoke softly across the fire. You think they come tomorrow? Maybe, he said. Maybe they won't. She looked at the coals, their glow reflected in her eyes. Either way, we ready. He nodded. Outside the coyotes sang again. Inside, 2 exiles sat by a single flame, not speaking, not daring to hope, yet somehow against every law of this brutal land, beginning to trust the shelter they'd built from dust, fire, and silence. The next morning came gray and windless. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than any sound. A thin mist clung to the slopes of Bitter Creek, turning the rocks soft as memory. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before crossing that narrow valley. Sawyer stepped outside first. His boots left sharp impressions in the damp earth. The air smelled of iron and sage, a morning smell that spoke of work and waiting. He scanned the ridge. Nothing moved, no riders, no birds, not even the faint rattle of wind through grass. Still, silence here never meant safety. Silence only meant the land was listening. Inside, Ayanna was awake already. She knelt near the hearth, feeding slender sticks to the coals. Her hair was still loose from sleep, dark and wild. The firelight made her skin look like copper brushed with gold. The small patch of soil she had planted yesterday was now circled neatly with stones, each one pressed down, as if she were marking a grave. When she saw him watching her from the doorway, she said quietly, "Earth remember kindness faster than men." He didn't know how to answer that. So he poured the coffee instead, the liquid hissing as it hit the tin. They ate, in near silence, cornbread, gone stale beans, reheated from the night before. Neither complained. They had both learned that silence could be food when the world gave nothing else. By midday they were working side by side. Sawyer climbed onto the roof, hammering down a warped plank where the wind had loosened it. Every strike echoed across the valley like a heartbeat. Ayanna swept the dirt floor, her movements small and careful, humming a tune that rose and fell like breath, an old rhythm that seemed to belong to the earth itself. From above he caught fragments of her song's soft syllables he couldn't understand, yet he knew the sound meant comfort. Sometimes she paused to glance at the horizon as if expecting the land to speak back. When her eyes turned toward the ridge, they narrowed not in fear, but in knowing. In the late light, Sawyer walked the fence line. The wire hummed faintly in the wind. Halfway down the slope he saw them hoof prints, fresh and deep, cutting south to north. He crouched, brushing a hand over the tracks. 3 horses, maybe 4. The edges were still crisp. Whoever they were, they'd passed before sunrise. He straightened slowly and looked back toward the cabin. Ayanna stood in the doorway, wrapped in a gray shawl that fluttered just enough to remind him she was real. "They follow?" she asked. "Maybe." "You afraid?" He shook his head. "Not yet." She tilted her head slightly as though measuring his honesty. "Fear make you blind. Better to see it coming." He didn't answer. Some truths didn't need one. That night the sky burned red behind the mesas. It was the color of blood left too long in the sun. The fire between them cracked softly, throwing gold and shadow against her face. She was sewing a tear in her sleeve with a bone needle, her fingers moving with the steady patience of someone who'd mended more than cloth in her life. "Why'd they hang you like that?" he asked at last. She didn't look up. "Because I spoke. About what? About land that was not theirs," she said. "About graves they plowed under. They call it progress." He looked down at his hands, rough and steady, scarred from the same world that had scarred her. "I rode for men like that once," he said quietly. "Thought I was keeping peace. Turns out I was just clearing the way." She looked up then. Her eyes caught the light, dark and deep as water at night. "You stop now?" He nodded, throat tight. "Yeah. A little late." "Late still time," she said. The wind found its way through the cracks in the cabin walls, stirring the ashes. He saw her shiver and moved before he could think better of it. He pulled his coat from the peg and draped it across her shoulders. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed. "Why you do that? You're cold." She touched the fabric lightly, feeling its weight. The coat smelled of smoke iron and the long miles of a man who had tried too long to outwalk himself. "You keep nothing for yourself. I keep this land," he said. Her mouth curved faintly. "No, land keep you." They sat in silence, and for once the silence was not hollow. It was thick, alive, like air before rain. When he rose to feed the fire, she said, "You look at sky too much. Look here." She tapped the ground between them. "Everything answer here." He knelt beside her. "Teach me then." She hesitated, studying him. Then she reached for a handful of soil and poured it into his palm. "Feel it." Not with hand inside. He waited. The earth was cool, grainy, pulsing faintly from the day's stored warmth. "What am I supposed to feel?" he asked. "Truth," she said simply. "Always truth in ground." He sat still. Somewhere outside a coyote barked once and went silent. The fire's light flickered, making her face half shadow, half flame. He thought she looked like the spirit of the land itself, something both wounded and whole. Later, when the sky thinned toward dawn, she spoke again, voice soft as breath. "If they come, you not kill." He turned his head. "You think they'll stop if I ask polite. They come for fear," she said. "If you give them blood, they take your soul." His eyes went to the rifle leaning by the door. The metal caught a faint gleam from the embers. A single line of cold light. "Then what do I do?" he asked. "Stand," she said, "with me." He looked at her for a long moment. Her gaze didn't waver. In the space between them, something shifted, not surrender, not defiance, but a quiet agreement that felt older than either of them. Outside, the wind turned north. The next day would bring riders. But for now, there was warmth and something like peace. Morning came with colorless light, the kind that hides everything until it's too late. Sawyer was already up checking the rifle, though he hated the feel of it in his hands now. Ayanna moved silently behind him, gathering dried herbs and tying them in bundles. "What's that for?" he asked. "Protection," she said. Smoke confuse men who walk with hate. He didn't argue. He had stopped arguing with her sometime in the night. They spent the morning working without words. He split wood. She boiled water, washing her wounds again with careful patience. By afternoon, the sky began to change, the kind of change you could feel in your bones before you saw it. The mist had burned away, and the wind came low and dry from the south. At the ridge, Sawyer saw them. 4 riders this time, dust rising behind like a wounded ghost. He stayed still until they were gone from sight, then came down the slope, slow thinking. When he returned, Ayanna was sitting by the fire pit outside, grinding something in a small stone bowl. She didn't look surprised. "They near," he said. "I know. What do you want me to do?" She met his eyes. "Nothing yet. We wait. We trust. Trust." The word felt foreign in his mouth. He had trusted the army once, trusted the law, trusted silence. All of it had failed him. But when she said it, it didn't sound like hope. It sounded like command. That night, they ate little. The sky turned copper, the land dark. Coyotes cried again, farther this time. Ayanna lit a small clay lamp and placed it in the window. Its glow spread soft across the room, touching the walls like a blessing. "Why the light?" he asked. "So the good spirits find us first," she said. He didn't laugh. Not this time. He just nodded. When she sat near him, the air seemed to change again, thicker, warmer. She held the same bundle of herbs she'd tied earlier and tossed a few leaves into the fire. The smoke rose white fragrant, wrapping around them like slow rain. He felt his shoulders ease. For the first time in years, his heartbeat matched something other than fear. "What do you see when you look at me?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her. The question wasn't vanity. It was a challenge. "I see someone who survived," he said. "Not same as living," she replied. He hesitated. "Maybe not. But it's a start." She studied him for a long time, then said, "You have ghost eyes. You carry people who not here anymore." He smiled faintly. "Yeah. Some names still echo." She leaned closer, almost whispering. Then, "Let them go. You not carry all the world." He wanted to tell her it wasn't that easy, that the world sticks to a man no matter how far he rides, but her voice made the thought fade. Outside thunder rumbled far away, the kind that stays on the edge of the world. She reached across the space between them and laid her palm flat on his chest. "Here," she said, still beating. He caught her wrist gently, not to stop her, but to steady himself. Her hand was warm. His wasn't. For a long time neither moved. The wind sighed against the cabin walls and the fire dimmed to a deep red glow. Finally she withdrew her hand. "Tomorrow, when they come, I speak. You listen." He nodded. "And if they don't listen, then we show them we still alive." He didn't know if that meant fighting or something else. But he nodded anyway. By midnight the storm returned, not of rain but of wind. Dust swept through the gaps in the shutters, whispering like voices too old to name. Ayanna slept near the fire, her breathing steady. Sawyer sat awake, watching the light touch her face. She looked younger when she slept, not softer, but free of the guard she wore like armor. He wondered how many nights she'd spent running, how many mornings she'd woken to chains. He thought of what she'd said, "If they come, you not kill." He looked at the rifle again and realized it wasn't fear she wanted him to fight. It was the part of himself that believed killing was the only way to live. He reached for the gun, broke it open, and emptied the cartridges into his hand. Then he set it aside. The gesture felt small, but in that quiet cabin it was a kind of prayer. When dawn came, it came slow, like the world was deciding whether to begin again. Ayanna was already outside, hair loose, standing barefoot in the dirt near the seeds she had planted. Sawyer joined her. "See," she said, pointing. Tiny green shoots had broken through the soil. He crouched beside her. "Didn't think they'd come up so fast." She smiled. "Earth hurry when she want to live." He touched the sprout gently with a calloused finger. "Guess she's got something in common with you." She She looked at him, half amused, half unreadable. "You learn joke now, maybe," he said. "Maybe I'm remembering how." For the first time she laughed, a sound quiet, but real, like the land exhaling. When he looked up from the seedlings, he saw movement on the ridge. 4 riders again. Closer this time. He felt Ayanna tense beside him. "Go inside," he said. She shook her head. "No, we stand." He turned toward her. "You sure about this?" "Yes," she said. "Trust the ground. Trust the fire." He nodded, though the word trust still felt heavy. By noon, dust trailed down from the ridge like a wound. The riders slowed as they neared the cabin rifles slung low. One of them shouted something, a name or a warning. Sawyer stood at the doorway, Ayanna beside him, shawl wrapped, tight eyes steady. When the men came into view, their faces were hard, the kind that needed no introduction. "Well, I'll be damned," the one in front said. "Didn't expect to find you keeping company with the likes of her." Sawyer said nothing. The man spat into the dirt. "We came to finish what was started." Ayanna stepped forward. "What you start you cannot finish," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried like a bell through the air. "You hang me once, earth remember. You do again, sky remember too." The men shifted uneasily. One laughed to cover it. "She's got a mouth on her." Sawyer's hand hovered near his belt, but she reached out, touching his arm lightly. "Stand with me," her eyes said. He lowered his hand. The wind picked up. Dust swirled around their boots. The riders glanced at each other. Something in the air had changed, the kind of shift that made animals turn and run. "You think you scare us with talk," the leader sneered. Ayanna crouched, took a handful of soil, and let it fall between her fingers. "No," she said softly. "I let earth choose." The wind rose sudden and sharp, lifting the dust straight into their faces. The horses reared, snorting, eyes wide. The men cursed, pulling back on the reins. Sawyer didn't move. He just watched as the dust storm circled, howling low around the cabin like a living thing. When it cleared, the riders were gone, retreating, swearing, the sound of their hooves fading into the ridge. Ayanna exhaled slowly. Sawyer turned to her. "What did you do?" "Nothing," she said. Earth speak loud when she tired of cruelty. He laughed once, shaking his head. Guess she finally found her voice. Ayanna looked at him, eyes bright in the late light. "No," she said. "You did." And then, for the first time since either had known peace, they stood together, not as prisoner and savior, not as man and woman, but as two people still learning what it meant to stay. Outside, the world was vast and uncertain, but inside that small cabin there was a single steady truth, the fragile bond of trust, growing like wild corn from the ashes of all that had been buried. The sky turned the color of bruised copper by noon. From the ridge above Bitter Creek came the faint glint of sunlight on metal rifle barrels catching firelight. Sawyer saw it first while splitting logs. He froze mid-swing, the axe still buried in the wood. Then the echo reached him, the slow, steady rhythm of approaching horses. He turned toward the cabin. Ayanna was outside, bent over the small ring of stones where her seeds had begun to sprout. She didn't need to look up. Her body went still, as if she felt the tremor through the ground. "They come," she said. "Stay inside," he told her. She rose, brushed the dust from her hands, and gave a short, quiet laugh. "No wall keep truth away." He grabbed the rifle anyway. The air smelled of heat and iron, that scent before violence. 3 riders appeared from the east, their coats flapping like black flags. The lead man wore a silver badge on his vest, Sheriff Hammond. Behind him 2 others, Harlan Pike and a ranch hand Sawyer knew too well. Men who'd drunk too much and thought cruelty a form of sport. The horses stopped 10 paces from the porch. Hammond tipped his hat. "Morning halt." Sawyer didn't return it. "What brings you out here?" "Got word you picked something up. Don't belong to you." The sheriff's tone was easy, almost kind. "A piece of Apache trouble. We're here to take her back." Sawyer leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. "Don't see how a person can belong to anyone." Pike spat in the dirt. "She's a thief. Took supplies, maybe more. Town wants justice." "Town or you?" Pike's eyes flashed. "You calling me a liar, I'm calling you drunk, before noon." The men shifted in their saddles, hands near their holsters. The wind stirred, carrying grit through the silence. From behind him, Sawyer heard the faint creak of the cabin floor. Ayanna stepped out, wrapped in his coat, her bare feet, leaving prints in the dust. "She not yours to judge Sawyer," said voice low. Hammond's smile thinned. "You sure you want to make that your fight halt? Folks already think you gone soft since the war." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "Maybe I have. Softer than rope and wings." That landed. Pike's grin vanished. "She was marked for a reason," he hissed. Ayanna looked at him calm as stone. "You mark me again, Sky will not forgive." The sheriff sighed. "Enough. Step aside, Sawyer. Let us finish this proper." "No." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Hammond's hand went to his gun. Before metal cleared, Leather Sawyer's rifle cracked once, a warning shot into the dirt between their horses. The sound rolled across the mesa like thunder. "You aim that again, and you'll have to use it," the sheriff said. "I just did," Sawyer answered. "That was your chance to ride out." The men glared, weighing pride against danger. Pike started to say something, but the sheriff raised a hand. "Let's go," he muttered. "Ain't worth dying on this dirt." They turned their horses, dust rising behind them. The wind swallowed their curses. When they were gone, Sawyer lowered the rifle and exhaled. His hands shook only after the danger passed. Ayanna stepped closer, her eyes on the horizon. "You choose," she said. He looked at her. "Choose what stand with truth, not fear." "I just did." She shook her head. "Not yet. You still think they come for me. But they come for what inside you." He didn't understand, not fully, but her words left a mark. By dusk, he walked the fence line again, checking posts, mind heavy. Ayanna followed at a distance. When he stopped, she knelt by the patch of soil where her corn seeds slept beneath the dirt. She pressed both hands flat to the earth. "Tonight," she whispered, "we ask ground to hold us." He crouched beside her. "You think it listens?" She smiled faintly. "It listened better than men." Behind them, the sky bled into scarlet and gold. The first coyotes began to sing. Somewhere far off, the echo of hooves faded into the coming dark. Inside the cabin, he poured her coffee, the last of the tin. When she reached for the cup, their fingers brushed. Neither moved away. Outside, a storm gathered beyond the mesas, low thunder rolling closer, slow as judgment. That night, the storm came hard from the south. Lightning licked across the sky like torn silver veins, and thunder rolled over Bitter Creek, until the cabin shook in its frame. Sawyer nailed the shutters closed, but the wind kept finding a way through the cracks, cold and alive, like something hunting them. Ayanna sat by the fire, braiding her hair tight against her neck. The corn patch outside trembled in the rain. When the thunder cracked again, she looked up. "They come before dawn," she said simply. Sawyer turned from the window. "You sure? I feel it in the ground." "Horses. 4, maybe 5. He checked the rifle, fingers steady, though his heart wasn't. "Then we'll be ready." She shook her head. "Ready not mean kill." He let out a breath, half laugh, half despair. "You think talking will stop them?" "Not talking," she said. "Standing." He stared into the firelight, orange on her face, shadows moving like memory. "Last time I stood for something, people died." Ayanna reached into the pouch at her belt, drew out a small handful of red dust, and scattered it into the flames. The fire hissed, then flared a deeper color, earth red, not gold. "Then stand different," she whispered. "Let earth fight with us." He didn't know what she meant, but he felt something shift. The air pressed closer, as if listening. By first light, the storm had quieted. The land smelled clean, washed raw. On the ridge, 5 riders appeared, their silhouettes black against the gray sky. Hammond led them again, the badge dull in the half-light. Pike rode beside him, a rifle resting across his saddle. Sawyer stepped out to meet them. His hat brim dripped with rain. Ayanna followed barefoot, her shawl bound tight, her face unreadable. She held no weapon, only a string of beads in her hand. Hammond drew up the reins. "You were warned, halt. You're sheltering a fugitive." "She's under my roof," Sawyer said. "That makes her my guest." Pike spat into the mud. "Guest, she's a witch. You've seen what she did, made the fire turn red." Ayanna's eyes lifted to him, calm as still water. "Fire show truth. Maybe you don't like to see it." The sheriff's voice hardened. "Step aside, Sawyer. You can keep your land, your pride, your damn loneliness, but the girl comes with us." "No." Pike's rifle moved first. The shot split the air. Sawyer felt it tear past his ear and buried himself behind a fence post, firing once in return. The bullet struck Pike's hat clean off. He reeled back, swearing. Then the wind rose. Not a breeze, something heavier, deeper, a rush from the canyons that carried grit and sound. The earth seemed to breathe beneath their boots. Ayanna stepped forward into the open, lifted her hands and pressed them to the ground. The beads fell from her fingers into the mud. She spoke softly, words swallowed by the wind. The riders' horses jerked and reared, eyes rolling white. Hammond tried to steady his mount, shouting over the noise. "What's she doing?" Sawyer didn't answer. He'd dropped his rifle, watching. The dust swirled upward, curling into shapes, no faces, no ghosts, just motion, just the land remembering. Pike cursed and fired again. The shot went wide. The thunder that answered wasn't from the sky. It came from the ridge itself, a hollow roar that shook the ground. The horses bolted, dragging the men with them, vanishing into the storm haze they'd ridden out of. When it was over, silence folded back around the cabin. Only rain soft now and the smell of wet earth. Sawyer walked to Ayanna. She was kneeling, breath, shallow hands still pressed to the soil. He touched her shoulder gently. "Hey," he said. "It's done." She looked up, eyes glistening in the gray light. "No, never done. But today, we still alive." He helped her to her feet. Mud streaked her dress, and her palms were stained red-brown. He didn't let go of her hand. The wind softened to a sigh. Overhead, the clouds began to break, pale dawn threading through the cracks. Sawyer followed her gaze toward the horizon. "What did you ask the earth to do?" "I ask her to remember mercy," she said. "So we don't forget." He nodded slowly. His hand still held hers. The rifle lay forgotten in the mud. Behind them, the corn patch glistened with rain. Between the stones, one fragile green shoot had broken the surface. They stood there until the light turned gold, two figures in the silence. After defiance, a man and a woman, bound not by victory, but by what they had chosen to spare. By the second morning, the wind had gone quiet. The air tasted new, washed clean, like the land had swallowed its anger and was waiting to see what would grow. Smoke still curled from the blackened hearth outside, thin as a ghost's breath. Sawyer rose early before the sun cleared the ridge. The storm had left the valley scattered with broken branches and the smell of rain-soaked sage. He found Ayanna by the creek, her feet in the water, hair unbraided, her shawl laid aside on a rock. She looked up at him, not surprised, not smiling, just present. "Ground still wet," she said. "Good for planting," he answered. They walked back together in silence. The cabin stood scarred, but upright, mud spattered on its walls, the door still swinging on one hinge. It looked like the world they'd both survived, damaged but standing. Ayanna knelt by the small patch beside the porch. The green shoot had doubled overnight, pale and trembling but alive. She pressed her fingers to the dirt. "See," she whispered. "Earth forgive faster than men." Sawyer crouched beside her. "Think it'll make it." She nodded. "If we stay." He took off his hat, turned it in his hands. "You planning too?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes wandered across the hills to where the storm had broken the line of trees. "If I go, I take memory. If I stay, I plant one." He looked at the fence, half collapsed near the pasture. Could use another pair of hands. She smiled faintly. Could use another heart too. They worked through the day, quiet, steady. He fixed the fence. She stacked stones along the garden's edge. When the sun reached its highest, he fetched 2 mugs of water, and they sat in the shade, watching the land breathe again. A hawk circled overhead. The sound of the creek drifted faint and slow. After a while, Ayanna reached into her pouch and drew out something small, one of the beads that had fallen from her hand during the storm. She set it on the table between them. "For memory," she said. He touched it carefully. The bead was smooth, red as dusk. "I'll keep it." She shook her head. "No, you plant it. Same as seed." He smiled, the kind that barely reached his mouth but changed his eyes. "All right." At dusk he dug a shallow hollow near the porch, pressed the bead into the soil, and covered it with his hand. Ayanna stood beside him, silent. When he finished, she reached down and laid her palm over his. Together they pressed the dirt flat. The sky burned gold, then lavender. Somewhere far off thunder whispered goodbye. Sawyer looked at her. You still think the land listens? She met his gaze. Now it knows your name. He didn't speak. He just took her hand and led her to the porch. They sat until the stars came, until the crickets found their voices again. When the first light of morning touched the mesa, Sawyer rose, walked to the fence line, and placed the rifle on one of the posts. He left it there, metal gray against the sunrise. Behind him, Ayanna came to stand beside him, her shawl around both their shoulders. The air smelled of damp soil and smoke. Below them, Bitter Creek shimmered in the dawn. A breeze lifted the edge of her